Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and today on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I am joined by Casey and Marie Norris from the Potato Candy Podcast Network to talk about tabletop role-playing games, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this. 2022 is flying by so fast, and I just reviewed my goals for the year. It's not too late to set some effective goals for 2022 for yourself. And the Goal Process 101 ebook helps you do just that. With a straightforward process and practical exercises, you'll be guided to set the right goals for you and set out a plan to achieve them. Get your copy of the Goal Process 101 ebook by going to goalprocess101.com. Use CNU2022 at checkout to save 10%. Now, back to the show. This week, we start a two-part interview with Casey and Marie Norris from Potato Candy. One of their podcasts focuses on horror-focused RPGs. That started me thinking about some of the dark, almost horror-like events in the Bible. God turning the Nile and all the water in Egypt to blood must have seemed like a horror scene to the people living in the country. Exodus 7:16 through 21 says, "Then say to him, 'The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish of the Nile will die, and the river will stink. The Egyptians will not be able to drink its water.' The Lord said to Moses, 'Tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone.' Moses did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt." Now, if that's not a horror scene, I'm not sure what is. But before we get to our interview, let's do some nerdy news. And with Star Wars Celebration being this last week, it's all Star Wars today. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni introduced The Mandalorian Season 3 this past week and announced it would be released in February of 2023. Bryce Dallas Howard and Carl Weathers will be back among the directors. At Celebration, an exclusive trailer was played. There were several leaks of the Season 3 trailer by fans using their cell phones, but Disney is aggressively applying copyright strikes on those who leaked it. Hopefully, the public will get to see that trailer very soon. The upcoming Disney Plus show Andor received an official trailer. Andor will be a prequel to Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and reportedly will be at least 2 seasons of 12 episodes each. That will make it the longest season for a Disney Plus live-action Star Wars series so far. From the trailer, it looks dark and gritty with lots of action. Hopefully, they have not given us all the best parts in the trailer. Look for Andor to drop on Disney Plus on August 31st this year. Disney also announced 2 new animated series, Tales of the Jedi an anthology series looking at the origins of many popular characters from the prequel eras, including the origin of Ahsoka and Young Jedi Adventures, which will follow younglings as they learn the ways of the Force. While Tales of the Jedi will release this fall exclusively on Disney+, Young Jedi Adventures seems to be aimed at a much younger audience and will be released on Disney Plus and on Disney Junior sometime in 2023. I'm excited for Tales of the Jedi, but it looks to me like I'm not the target audience for Young Jedi Adventures. That's all the news I have for you now. Well, today I interview Casey and Marie Norris from the Potato Candy Podcast Network. I know it's a funny name. Casey and Marie are married believers and each are hosting a different podcast. Casey hosts Dreadful Tales, a kind of young horror RPG real play, while Marie hosts Blank Scenario, where she helps GMs with ideas and prompts for creating worlds and stories for their own games. We do have a special announcement right at the end of the show, so make sure you listen right to the end. Now, let's get right into the interview. Casey, Marie, it is so great to have you on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast this week.
No, thank you for having us.
It's great to be here.
So, Potato Candy is your podcasting network.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us a little bit about who Potato Candy is and why people might look into what you guys do.
Well,
I'm like, we're a cooking show. No, wait.
Yeah. That is one of the dangers
New
with
segment.
the name.
Honestly, when I heard Potato Candy, my first thought was, is that a thing? I'm going to go look
It
that up.
surprisingly is. Yes.
It is a thing. Well,
Mhm.
I mean, I know there's potato pasta. Gnocchi is a potato pasta. And, there's potato bread. I'm thinking potato candy. That's interesting.
Yeah, that was actually how we sold our friend on the name, was the fact his wife found out it's essentially a really awesome Reese's peanut butter cup, because essentially it's like peanut butter with potato flour and then it's rolled up, which is where we also got our symbol for our network from.
Fascinating.
No,
It's not easy to make, let me tell you.
it's not.
So how did the name come about?
Well, so we originally started this network with one of our good friends from college. Marie and I did. And with him and then his wife that's also on the podcast as well. And as we were looking up and trying to come up with a list of names, I think we had something like 20 names that were on there. And bless his heart, Isaac is dyslexic. And so whenever he writes things down, his writing...
said that exactly the way I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
His writing is a little bit wonky at times. He'll tell you in the podcast, most of the time he doesn't write actual notes. He'll write in doodles. So putting the name down on there, one of the ones was supposed to be Radio Candy, which we still go back and forth on, like, should we change it to Radio Candy? But it looked like Potato Candy with the way that he wrote it down, and it stuck for Marie and I, and it took some convincing, and finding out that it was an actual thing was the deal that sold him on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's funny. Happy accidents.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
So now you guys have two different podcasts that you do.
Mhm.
One is kind of a real play,
Mhm.
and the other is more of an RPG help podcast, right?
Yep.
Give me a little more about those two different podcasts.
Casey, you want to go first? Yours is simpler.
Yeah. Okay, so mine is Dreadful Tales is the name of it. And it uses two different RPG systems to play. We alternate between characters and story arcs going back and forth. So one of the systems that we use is Monster of the Week, with some editing to it, because Monster of the Week is certainly not clean friendly, which we set out from the beginning with Potato Candy that we wanted to create clean content. It didn't necessarily have to be Christian. And for me, I'll specifically say, back in college, we took story time. We took a course called Theater in the Christian. And in that course, one of the topics that came up was, does entertainment have to be specifically quote unquote Christian for it to be good content or for it to be clean, whatever. And the answer that I came back to at the end of that course was, I mean, how can content be quote unquote Christian? It's just content at the end of the day, whatever that is. So the value that you place on it is
can't be saved.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Well, the value you place on it is going to be what makes it good or bad. And so approaching the show from that direction, I wanted to create a horror story, and there isn't much horror out there that isn't either completely boiled down to its squeaky clean roots, like childish horror, or you have stuff that is so extreme and out there that it's just, you walk away from it feeling like you've lost a couple of years off of your life, because it's not uplifting at all. Yeah. And so I wanted to strike that balance and create a story that was both creepy, but that didn't weigh a person down or didn't include things that we weren't comfortable with. So we try to walk that line very, very cleanly. But anyways, one of them is Monster of the Week, slightly edited to be able to be clean. The other one I do is one called Little Fears, which is a indie RPG.
Okay.
And I use Nightmare Edition specifically, but the basic premise of that system is that you are either anywhere from 6 to 13-year-old kid, and all of those monsters and scary things that you were afraid of as a child are actually real. They're not just figments of your imagination. So you get to go a lot of directions with that one, and I've had a lot of fun with doing that. The arc that we just finished up releasing, depending upon when this is released, the arc we just finished up releasing was the Little Fears arc, and we're going to be going back to Monster of the Week. And in that one, we've got Marie is playing a person who is somewhere in between, like being possessed and maybe also dealing with her own like personal demons in the past. We got somebody who is the child of Hephaestus and running around with a fire whip. And then we've got Isaac, who is running around as a living statue from Russia that believes himself still basically to be in Soviet Union Russia. So it's an interesting ragtag group that you get running with that.
Interesting. And then the other podcast is more of a helping GMs with some guidance on how to set up scenarios. Is that right? Tell me a little bit more about that one.
Yeah. So Blank Scenario I had a whole list in my notebook of ideas for a podcast. And one of them I thought would be really cool was a 1-page RPG. And not necessarily an RPG, but a scenario at least, of making a scenario that's a legitimately one-shot, because that's incredibly difficult to make for D&D.
Yeah.
But it fits on 1 page. It's simple. You come up within 30 minutes, give or take. We take longer than that typically, but it's close enough. And then recording it and basically creating it. Eventually I simplified to Blank Scenario. And whenever I come up with the names, I just replace the blank with whatever the title is. So every single name ends in scenario. And
nice.
It's evolved a little bit. Basically, it's nice because the show requires very little prep work on my end. I just say, hey, who saw something interesting, such as a meme or billboard, and we spur of the moment spend 30 minutes making a scenario for it. It's been really fun because at the end of the episode, we take 5 minutes off screen. Everyone writes down their ideas, and we present what we would do with what we've discussed so far. So you end up with about 3 to 4 different scenarios, depending upon who's on the show. So it's really just helping people realize you can take any story and just create it on the fly if you need to. It doesn't have to be really elaborate. It doesn't have to be super fancy. We had a guest on who writes scenarios for a living, and he came up with like a 4 to 5 segmented campaign. And he's like, "Is this okay?" I'm like, "It's fine."
He put us to shame.
I know. I'm just super impressed you managed this. I was like, I feel like mine is not adequate anymore.
Yeah, most of our scenarios are like fast food. You can take them and they're great, but it's like, okay, I'm good. I'm on to the next. And he was like, so here's the philosophy of this one. And
oh my goodness,
this represents this. Fun. It's going to be a 4-story arc. Okay.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, but that's the main segment. We also have a couple of other ones. We have Link Campaign, where Casey and I are currently working on a long-form campaign, building it from scratch. it's a very fun Mad Max apocalypse style world. So I'm really happy with working on that. Blank Mechanic, where we focus on the nitty gritty of D&D, of the dice rolling for the GM behind the screen. And of course, I'm basically just like, what other name after blank can I use for a segment on the show now?
Very nice. Well, speaking of RPGs, but hopefully by the time this releases, I will be releasing some bonus content for the Marvel Multiverse role-playing game playtest.
Nice.
I have a group of podcasters that are getting together to playtest the new RPG. So we're going to be highly RPGing along the way. So and I know you mentioned a couple of different RPGs that you're currently using on the shows. What are kind of your favorite RPGs? We talked about this a lot last summer. We talked about this a lot last summer. I would always ask, is there something in particular you really prefer to play? And another question I like to ask, and we'll get to this one here, is there some particular mechanic you found in an RPG that you're like, I really love this specific mechanic that they have? But is there a particular one that you really enjoy playing?
I've never gotten to play a full game of it, but I love the Call of Cthulhu RPG. I had the book on my desk until I put it away this morning. It was on my desk ready to go for a game that I'm currently involved in for a play-by-post. But I'm mildly obsessed with Call of Cthulhu. Casey, don't correct me. I am mildly obsessed.
That's an understatement.
I got the rule book 4 years ago now. And I've never gotten to play in a home game of it because no one will run it for me. So I've had to run it for myself a couple of times.
To be fair, the book for that is like 2.5 inches thick. That is a long book to read.
It's technically, but there's a split version of it you can buy now. It's fine. But that's one of my favorites. Second favorite's probably City of Mist, just because it's kind of nitty noir investigation, but you play as someone who's inhabited by these stories from myths such as King Arthur, Beowulf, Lord Riding Hood. It's a really fun system, and it's a lot to figure out for a character, but it's a really fun system. It's powered by Apocalypse as well, so it's a very simple dice rolling system.
So
how about you, Casey?
So for me, the Little Fears was actually what came out of me trying to find. So I have several people around me that I looked around and I was like, okay, Marie is the Call of Cthulhu runner. Isaac, one of the guys that I know runs D&D, like that's his thing. And I was determined that I was going to find my thing. And it's really hard to find horror specific stuff that's not Call of Cthulhu because say what you will about
Cthulhu horror or just weird.
It depends upon which version of the system you get. There are several spin-offs for other systems that are Call of Cthulhu marked.
Yeah.
Okay. I've always, when Call of Cthulhu comes through my mind, some people say horror, but I always just think weird. It's the weird world. It's not necessarily horror world.
It was weird science fiction back in the 1920s, so it does fit within that.
Yeah, teaching kids how to run horror games has taught me that horror is really just a tone, which is what makes it really hard to find systems that fit in with that. But Little Fears, one of the things that I love with that system is that it has some of the nitty gritty to it of these are the specific dice rolls that you need to do. Combat is, as tedious as it can be to run, is mostly simplified. So you're not having to worry about, okay, every single person take a roll. It's the way they describe it in the book is pick the strongest character. The strongest character is going to make the roll. People who want to involve themselves, tell me what it is that you're doing. And that's just going to add bonus points onto that main character's roll. And I love that because it keeps it all smooth. It actually allows for turn order because that's one of the problems that I've run into with any Powered by the Apocalypse stuff is that, yes, it's very cinematic and it's very flowy, but because of that, I'm a people pleaser. And that's hard to be a people pleaser in a game where you're supposed to like destroy the hopes and dreams of your players in combat. Because then I feel bad for anything that I do to them. So I have to have some kind of rules that I can hide behind and be like, well, you know, this is what the book says. This has got to be the thing. So that's one of the things I've appreciated. But as far as a specific mechanic is concerned, I've greatly adopted the 50-50 approach. And it was another podcaster that I heard first use it, but it literally comes down to, if there's a moment in game where your players come up with something that's a good idea that you really like and you're not sure if it'll break your game, just say highs or lows or odds or evens, and then roll a dice and give them what they want or don't give them what they want. Bottom line, I've had some of the best story adjustments happen just on a 50-50 roll, because a player will come up with something that may completely not work and they don't get it with the 50-50. But if you've given them that chance, then they're going to start looking for other ways. And it just develops a lot more improvisation in game. It's just a lot more fun.
Very cool.
Yep.
What about you, Marie? Is there a particular mechanic that you've run across in a system that you're like, I really, really enjoy this mechanic?
The mechanic I always lean on that is from the Call of Cthulhu RPG system, of course, but it's one that I've actually pulled into D&D as well. It's called an idea roll. Within Call of Cthulhu, you have an idea stat that's based upon basically how intelligent you are. And so if your players get stuck in a mystery, because Call of Cthulhu is all about finding the clues and then running away from the monsters because you really don't want to fight Cthulhu. But if they get stuck, they can roll the idea roll. And then you as a GM will give them information. If they pass, they get information that helps them in the case. If they fail, they still get the information, but something bad happens with that information as well. So rather than just discovering a drawer that has a notebook that you need to get the code for, you know, secret access point, you open the drawer, see the book, and then see there's a tripwire next to it, and now there's a countdown timer going. And I pulled that into D&D as well with the intelligence stat. Just roll intelligence, set, 15 as a number, and just if you pass, you'll get some hints. If you fail, you get some hints, but it doesn't go well for you.
Nice. Well, when you're looking at a system, like some systems are really crunchy. Lots of dice rolls, lots of looking things up on tables, and a lot of times we call these RPGs, we call them collaborative storytelling. So some people run games that are, you almost never roll a dice. Roll the dice. You just, you're just going back and forth, and every once in a while you roll the dice. What's your preference when it comes to role-playing games like that? Do you prefer the really crunchy, give me all the rules so I can keep track of everything? Or do you prefer the, let's just tell a story and have fun?
This is a cheap question on my end.
I love both systems. I like the crunchy D&D. I really want to try to play first edition D&D as much as I know the numbers are crazy.
Actively playing first edition right now.
I need to try it at some point because I love the number crunching that comes with it. I don't want to run it at any point, but I love to play in it. But I also love with Little Fears how just, I'm going to do this, roll a dice, and we move on. It's very simple. It's much more focused on the story. So from podcasting perspective, I prefer the more collaborative with less dice. From personal perspective, I love having a thick rule book that I spend hours going through and building a character and understanding all the rules and having all the numbers ready to back me up. I'm a details person, so I love that.
Me have dumb brain, me no detail. I enjoy the crunch if it helps me to guide the story, like specifically to guide the story. That is really super useful. But most of the time, I would rather the system not get in the way of a good story. So I'm kind of like Marie in that there's that middle balance in between. What was the name? I think it was Mithras was a system that I first found when I was like, oh, this is going to be the one. I love this. It's perfect. And I really started getting into playing it. And I think it was based on RuneScape. I don't know if that's going to connect to anybody else as to how detailed that is, but it was more detailed than I originally understood it to be. And so it, as amazing as it was, I just could not do anything with it. So whenever we've been playing, we've done entire sessions where we may roll a die at the time, but I think for me that background in theater training and improv makes it a lot more fun to play off of what the characters want and make that dice roll mean something, where like they're pressured or there's a problem going on and they're going to try to overcome it, because that's where a lot of that tension comes from, is make that dice feel almost like the enemy itself, because that's that tension that you want there. And then for everything else,
ally.
just, or ally. Well, goodness gracious. Okay, here's the thing that I actually do like. Now, speaking about the Little Fears system, because now she's making me think of this mechanic. One of the cool things that Little Fears does is it gives you basically a pool of dice that you can roll based upon the stats that you have. And it's like, okay, I've got this thing and I've got this quality, which will add maybe 3 more dice, and I've got this quality, will add something else. So you might be rolling like 6 to 8 dice at a time.
Wow.
But it only allows you to take the top 4 dice. 3 dice? It's been a while. Only allows you to take the top 3 dice. But if any of those dice, because it's only played with D6s, if any of those dice hit 6, they explode. And it keeps exploding until it's all said and done. So the original setup of Little Fears, it tells you that 9 should be an average roll, 12 should be a little bit more difficult, 15 above that. Marie on average will roll 15s. The highest she's ever rolled is something like 47.
No, we broke 50 once.
We broke 50 once. All with her, not sponsored, but all with her king and yellow sign dice.
Yeah.
That have basically been banned from the table, because like I looked at the average in the book and I was like, okay, Blair, you've got to be wrong. There's no way that 9 is the average, because oh my goodness, they will roll so high every single time, and so I have
until
to
we
think
don't,
up.
of course.
Yeah, and that's also fun. Whenever I'm like, okay, I'll set it at like a 15 or a 20, because they'll probably hit that 7.
Yeah. Yeah, every time.
So let me ask you this. This is something I'm dealing with right now.
Okay.
The Marvel, this is specifically the new Marvel system that I'm working with. And I've played a lot of different games. I cut my teeth on old GURPS 3rd edition. Back in the 90s. And, I played Champions in high school, but I didn't play a whole lot. GURPS was kind of where I really I had books and books on my shelf, Champions was like, GURPS will do that to you. Champions was like, I borrowed the book from my friend long enough to build my character.
Yeah.
So, but never really played D&D when I was in high school, just because I just didn't have any friends that were playing. They were playing something else. And then I was into the Palladium system because I was a huge Robotech fan. So I, read all the Palladium Robotech books, and but a lot of different systems I've dealt with. One thing I'm running into a lot with the new Marvel system is it's constantly telling me the narrator should just choose. They call the GM, they call them the narrator.
Okay.
Should just choose a number and allow the players to roll and see whether they, whether they should hit that number or not. And I'm struggling a little bit on where should I come up with these numbers so that I'm not making things entirely too hard, or making things entirely too easy, on a system I've never played, which has tons and tons of modifiers, because it's really a pretty crunchy system. I'm surprised it's as crunchy as it is. So I'm struggling a little bit. So as a GM, how would you coach somebody on, I know you don't know the system, but how would you coach somebody in general on making that decision? Like you said, I just decided 15. how do you figure out what number you're gonna, if it's not something that's strictly in the book, if there's no mechanic for this, I just have to come up with something and I'm gonna make them roll for it because I'm not sure if I want this to happen or not, and I'm just gonna let the dice make the decision. How would you coach somebody through something like that?
Well, for me, I tend to look at I tend to think of it in terms of tiers. So there are 3 different tiers that I could put it at. And, similar to what standard D&D and like every other RPG does, you consider your average, your difficult, and your level above that and beyond. And ultimately for me, whenever I have to pick what difficulties I want things to be at, I try to look at where I want the story to go, what will service the story best. Because on one hand, that might be a really difficult role, but boy, when the player overcomes it, then you get that really epic moment for that player in that moment. And it almost at the same time would feel cheated if you put it too low. So for me, servicing the story always becomes the best first step of how difficult do I want this to feel to that player, because that's the other thing. Like it's the same thing I run into in the classroom. It's the disconnect between a teacher and a student. A teacher understands everything perfectly. They can see the whole picture, and from the student's mind, it's like you gave me this little bit. I don't see everything that you see in your head. So same thing from GM to player. As a GM, I can see the whole world. I can see that there's this creature that's right around the corner that they have no idea about. So how difficult do I want to make this feel for them? Because they're now having to pick up their dice and put fate to just a random roll. I don't know if there's a specific number crunch that I would say to go through, because again, like me, dumb brain. But if you want to get crunchy with it, put yourself in the position of what do we want to say, like a rounded number that you can think of like, okay, this is average, this would be a little bit more difficult, and something above that, and then just go from there. Because even with something like D&D or Little Fears, where it says here are these 5, 10, 15, 20 kind of averages, you're still going to have that on a sliding scale of somewhere in between based upon the world that you're in and the difficulty that those characters are dealing with.
Yeah, and I would second. I tend to think in terms of dice averages. So most dice, like D6s, roll an average of 4, I think. And then like a D10 rolls an average of 6 and whatever, so on. So if you know the average, you know that's what either rolling. I typically add on at least like 1 or 2 points, just because if they have a modifier, it's easier. So therefore, the higher number should be possible to hit. If they don't have a modifier, it means they're trying something they're not skilled in. So I drop that. So therefore, it's going to be harder for them to hit that. I tend to think very realistic to the world as well. Whereas Casey is focused on the story, like what would make it interesting? I'm like, okay, realistically in this world, if you don't have the power of flight, you're not flying. So to make this jump without something that helps you, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So I tend to think in terms of what are the rules that I've set for this world? And then if you're going to roll a die, how difficult is it going to be based upon what you have that's going to affect that ability? So for Marvel, if someone has a flight ability and they want to, catch up with something that's in the air, they're going to have an easier roll than someone who doesn't, because it just doesn't make sense for that person who can't fly to have the same number as person that can.
We talked so long that I had to split this episode into 2. So don't forget to check back next week for part 2, where we talk more about playing games as a competitive married couple and the pushback that some believers have for the horror genre. And check out the links in the show notes below to connect and hear more from Marie and Casey. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, click all those links down below, whatever they are, so you can keep up with us, and you'll get information about new content as we release it. And you can find all of our social links to our YouTube channel, and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. I do want to take just a moment to encourage you to join us as a supporter on Patreon. We've changed all of our Patreon levels, and each level has great benefits. and makes a huge difference in the ministry side of what we do. Supporters will be able to hear exclusive stories of believers we're serving around the world through our ministry partners in very, very difficult countries. To check it out or to partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or go to ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click on support in the menu. And while I'm at it, I do want to thank our current Patreon supporters, Sim, Peter, Joe, and our first ever supporter, Jared. Thank you so much for your support. One last announcement before we go. I do want to let you know that this Friday, I am going to drop the first episode of our Marvel Multiverse role-playing game play test, and we're going to see how it goes. You'll get to kind of see behind the scenes of what it's like to play the brand new game, and we go through a scenario, or at least we start the scenario. This will go through several bonus episodes that we're going to have over the course of the next month or so. So definitely make sure you check back in on Friday for that new exciting episode. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from 1 Thessalonians 5. May God himself, the God of peace, sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. The one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. We'll see you next week. Blessings.